Hello, my name is Randy Darnell. I want you to come join me as I take a look at local history and historic preservation using two of my favorite subjects, the Civil War and my home state of West Virginia. I took my family across the state and stopped at key historic Civil War sites, and I looked at a couple of different things, historic architecture, battlefield preservations, and even a national cemetery. West Virginia has been called a child of the Civil War. The state was created from Virginia due to the efforts of pro-Union men from Western Virginia. In the very early stages of the war, West Virginia played an integral role due to the importance of the Staunton and Parkersburg Turnpike and the B&O Railroad. I'm standing here in Philippi, West Virginia, next to this beautiful historic wooden bridge. This bridge was crossed by Union soldiers who were attacking Confederate troops stationed in Philippi. This battle became known as the Philippi Races. The wooden bridge was constructed in 1852. It was designed by Lemuel Chenoweth, who constructed a lot of wooden covered bridges in West Virginia. In 1938, though, to meet the demands of modern traffic, a concrete pier was added. Also, you can see here the concrete floor and the steel beams right beside the original wooden beams. And you can see under the bridge here a nice contrast between the original stone that was used and the new concrete and steel. In addition, in 1938, they added a walkway that pedestrians still use today. This bridge is a good example of historic preservation. Not only because you have the 1938 updates to meet modern needs, but also in 1989 the wooden bridge was burnt. But to preserve this historic bridge, it was rebuilt. They used as much of the original material as possible, and they spent $1.4 million to bring this beautiful covered bridge back to life. While First Bull Run will generally be remembered as the first battle of the Civil War, the Philippi Races can claim the first land action. It introduced George B. McClellan onto the public stage. It was his objective to keep the pro-Union Virginians protected and prevent the Confederates from getting the B&O Railroad. A two-pronged Union attack led by Colonel Benjamin Franklin Kelly surprised Confederate troops under Colonel George A. Porterfield. The green Confederate troops had not set up a perimeter guard, choosing instead to stay in their tents. The Confederates fled before the Union soldiers, and the battle became known as the Philippi Races. Since it was a small, relatively bloodless skirmish, and not a large battle, it has not generally been recognized as the first battle of the Civil War other than by locals, although it can claim the first amputee of the Civil War. After Philippi, the Confederates under the command of Brigadier General Robert S. Garnett had fortified two positions near the Staunton-Parkersburg Turnpike, one of which was Rich Mountain. McClellan moved his men from Clarksburg against the forces of Confederate Lieutenant Colonel John Pegram near Rich Mountain. On July 11th, Brigadier General William S. Rosecrans attacked Pegram's rear, and a 2-hour battle commenced. The result of the battle was that half the Confederates escaped, while the other half surrendered on July 13th. I'm standing at the spot where Confederate forces raised a defensive against the Union troops. You can see behind me here the foundations of an old stable where they hid behind in the fighting. Also, in this direction, there are boulders in which the Confederates also hid behind. And very interesting, on these boulders, we actually find one engraving from a Union veteran about a Union soldier, Clay Jackson, who was killed. The marking still barely remains, but you can see here it says that he was shot, and you can still make out killed here at this spot. I'm standing here at the Rich Mountain Battlefield site. It is preserved by the Rich Mountain Battlefield Foundation, which mostly relies instead of on state funds from historical societies, other types of donations. That's why you can see here a big difference is There's a lot of damage and vandalism to the site. You can see some bullet holes here, and so vandalism seems to be a real problem. Even the road isn't very well kept, as you see in some of the other state funded sites. Nearly 5 months after West Virginia declared statehood, Brigadier General William W. Averell attacked the Confederate forces led by Brigadier General John Echols in an attempt to disrupt the Virginia-Tennessee Railroad, which led to the Battle of Droop Mountain. Standing here in front of this reproduction of a cannon that would have been used by Confederate soldiers during the Battle of Droop Mountain. This state park was created to commemorate the battle, which was a significant battle in the Western Virginia campaign, as it was the battle that ended any hopes for the Confederates of holding the state of West Virginia. The battlefield was purchased in 1928 by the state to become a memorial to those who had fought in the battle. The park was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, everything from the famous wooden observation tower to the hiking trails, which lead to some Confederate trenches. To get to the trenches, there's a nice, well-kept trail. The trail is dotted with informative signs that gives visitors an idea of what took place on the battlefield. This is a good example of how battlefields can act like a primary source. For example, when you go to the site, you will see where the Confederates were entrenched, right here on this hillside. And standing there, you can get an idea of what these Confederates would have seen, as the Union soldiers would have had to come up from this field. In 1937, the divisions of parks took control of the land and refurbished the museum in 1974. The park also holds a biannual reenactment of the battle. Droop Mountain State Park has also preserved the original grave sites of Confederate soldiers, whose tombstones you can see behind me are rather unremarkable. In 1862, an omnibus act was created that called for the president to purchase lands to be used as national cemeteries. Later, in 1865, Quartermaster General Montgomery C. Meigs directed officers to survey lands looking for Union dead, which they could reinter in national cemeteries. I'm standing here at the Grafton National Cemetery in Grafton, West Virginia. It's on the National Historic Register site. This cemetery was dedicated to Civil War soldiers. In 1867, the War Department commissioned R.C. Bates to find a place for the Union soldiers of Western Virginia who had died in hospitals and battlefields to have a final place to rest. This area was chosen for a number of reasons. Grafton at the time was kind of an important hub for the B&O Railroad. Also in a very mountainous location, this spot provided a flat, level ground, and it was already close to a cemetery that was in use for Union soldiers. When they made the cemetery, they put it 3 tiers, and it housed 1,252 Union soldiers, with 613 of those soldiers unknown. Their graves are marked by the lower tombstones. The obelisk behind me marks the final resting place of Thornsbury Bailey Brown. He is rumored to be the first casualty of Union casualty of the Civil War. He was taken from his place of burial and reinterred here at the Grafton National Cemetery. The Grafton Cemetery is a good example of how cemeteries can act as a primary source for historians. Cemeteries provide information like birth and death years, sometimes even information like the cause of death, relatives, and even personal qualities of the deceased. On June 14, 1868, West Virginia's first governor, Arthur I. Borman, dedicated the Grafton Cemetery. In 1869, the town of Grafton celebrated Memorial Day, in which flags and flowers were given to Civil War veterans. Over the years, the tradition stuck, and today the town has a parade, and school children decorate the graves with flowers and flags. By visiting the cemetery at Grafton, the covered bridge at Philippi, and the battlefields of Droop and Rich Mountain,
It was clear to me that our state has people and associations that are committed to preserving the history of the Civil War in our state. One can only hope as time goes on that this attitude will prevail and that more history will be preserved in our state.